Hello everybody, welcome. Thank you for coming out to another session of ISSessions. It's so nice to have you guys here. We have a lot of news today, but it's like good stories to cover, so I'm very excited to hear about all of them. A lot of hacker organizations got taken down this month, apparently, so that's always nice to know. We're doing our job well, and I'm glad that we're contributing to something. So we're just going to start off with the news, we'll have a little break, and then we have our wonderful Todd coming in again today to teach us some nifty stuff, so I'm excited for that. But without further ado, we'll get started with the news. All right, Jack, take it away.
Yeah, so Alf V slash Black Hat, and side note, I finally got to the bottom of why they have two names. So if you're wondering, Alf V is the official name. However, once the group sort of kicked things off, that wasn't known to researchers at the time, so they started tracking the group as Black Hat because on the negotiation site for the victims, they had a little black hat icon, and it just kind of stuck because Black Hat's the cooler name, but if you want to sound smarter, you can call them Alf V. So with that said, Alf V is allegedly doing a exit scam right now, and I'll kind of go through the timeline here. It all sort of starts with February 21st, when United Health Group noticed an intrusion in the Change healthcare system. This was a very large hack, if you haven't heard. It led to disruptions all across the healthcare industry because clinics, pharmacies, all kinds of healthcare entities rely on this technology. And it led to a lot of consequences, like a lot of Americans were having trouble getting their prescriptions. They'd either have to pay the full upfront cost or just go without their medication. But anyways, continuing on, March 1st, Alf V actually receives $22 million in Bitcoin, one of the larger ransom payments. It is still, last I checked, unconfirmed if this was actually paid by Optum, which is the subsidiary of United Health Group, which runs the Change healthcare system. But also of note, Alf V's leak site is taken offline. Then things start to get interesting, even more interesting, on March 3rd, when an Alf V affiliate, so Black Hat or Alf V, is ransomware as a service. So Alf V, they develop the ransomware code and they maintain it. And then they have these affiliates who go out and intrude the company networks and deploy the ransomware. And then they split the cost. So one of their affiliates, Nachi, they made a post on the Russian language ransomware forum RAMP, stating that Alf V had cut them out of their share of the Change healthcare ransom. So Alf V got the $22 million, and then Nachi's account got locked. This was, according to Alf V, due to brute forcing against it, and they just sort of kind of delayed, kind of waffled a bit about getting it back online. They're like, oh, we need the chief admin to unlock the account. He's busy right now. Just don't worry about it. And then to sort of back up their claims, Nachi provides a crypto wallet address, which appears to be specifically for the Change healthcare payment. Transfer of $23 million went in. However, afterwards, the wallet got drained into a bunch of different other crypto wallets with transactions of 3.3 million each. Nachi also concerningly mentions that they still have access to the stolen Change healthcare data, which honestly just adds some more stress to that company. Okay, moving on. March 4th, more Alf V affiliates report that their accounts have been locked, and Alf V takes down their negotiation servers, and now they put out a message, sort of just, shucks guys, man, the feds got us. We're closing up shop now. And also of note, they actually put the ransomware source code up for sale for $5 million. The SSU can expect a purchase request from ISSessions shortly. If we all chip in, guys, we can really make the malware class more interesting here.
Spread out the cost over the 15,000.
Yeah, everyone just has to chip in like $300,000 and we can afford it. Yeah, we got this. Rumor has it they do have a buyer, so that's another thing which is interesting. It's an interesting story. But March 5th, the absolute cherry on top here, the Alf V site now shows a seizure message, like the one you're seeing here, where all the law enforcement agencies are sort of flexing, like, yeah, we got them, guys. You got the FBI, you got the NCA in Britain, Europol, and more. However, researchers pointed out this is a little fishy because the file, the PNG here, it's in a folder called "This website has been seized" _files. This is not, as far as I can tell, not typical for law enforcement. Usually it's just put in the root. What this looks like is ALF-V just saved the banner from another seizure and just threw it on their website to pretend they got seized. And this was confirmed when representatives from Europol and NCA both denied involvement in this seizure. One last thing, it's just, I find it a bit ironic that they're not actually seized and pretending to be seized, because back in December, they actually did get their website seized by the FBI, and they were trying to play that off as, no, we didn't get seized. So I guess everything's kind of come around.
They still haven't been.
Yeah, that's probably where they got it from, honestly. But yeah, really interesting. I guess there really is no honor among thieves, and I guess that's the moral of the story here.
All right. Somebody else got taken down. Shocker. Actually this time. So, pretty much late last month, which was about 2 weeks ago, in a joint effort with the FBI and pretty much every government organization, they were able to take down Lockbit's operation through their operation called Operation Kronos. I don't know if they jacked that from The Incredibles, but pretty cool name. It was basically, if you don't know, Lockbit was a ransomware as a service company. Same thing as the last one. They'd offer their services to any affiliates, and then they'd split whatever difference, or they'd go after them themselves. They've been said to extort over under $20 million, and were responsible for 16% of the ransomware attacks. I think we covered a bunch of them through the different news segments throughout the last couple of weeks. And so their targets, they included pretty much everybody, any sector from government, public sectors, hospitals, schools, high-profile clients, or like global organizations and companies, pretty much everybody, whoever they could get money from. And so the FBI has been having an ongoing investigation since 2021, and the takeover completely shut down most of their operations, which I think Europol said they took down 34 servers worldwide, and it's a nice image that they put up on all of their servers. You know, RCMP got their little notification in there too. So if anybody wants to make money, the government's offering a $15 million bounty to anything that relates to a associate. A $10 million bounty going to the identification of any leadership of Lockbit, and a $5 million bounty that leads to any kind of arrest. So anybody's looking to get rich quick, there you go. The attack pretty much resulted in a bunch of seizures of crypto wallets and everything. So $1 million of these guys got locked up. So they're running around begging anybody for some cash to stay safe. Lockbit claims that the attack was not because the government was skilled, but because they screwed up and were lazy. So take that how you will. And so far 2 people have been arrested. I think that was France and in Ukraine. And there's still 5 indictments and 3 international arrest warrants. A couple of them got on FBI's most wanted. So many of the affiliates are still unknown, and many are on the run. And the ones that are known are pretty much all fleeing to Russian-affiliated countries where they can't be extradited. That's it right now. They're all taken down. Some of them are trying to build it back up, but so far, they're all locked out.
So my story is about Hugging Face hosting code that backdoored user devices. If you don't know what Hugging Face is, it's kind of like a GitHub, but just for AI or like natural language processing models. So basically you can host your own files or like push your own requests, make your own basic model, and other people can access it and use it freely. There were approximately 100 submissions on the website that exhibited hidden and unwanted actions, so they didn't do exactly what the users suspected them to do. And then with 10 models on there actually being malicious and they compromise user security. Of those, 1 allowed attackers to gain full control of the user's device. So they could use a reverse shell, and they could basically use that reverse shell to commit large data breaches or basically do anything they wanted with that user's device. The malicious model, which was submitted by a user named Baller432, utilized the pickle format. And if you don't know what the pickle format is, it's a Python library that's used to convert objects and classes into human readable code. We had a Python class, and when he brought up pickle, I had never heard of it before, even though I used Python a lot before, and I was like, I'm never going to use pickle in my life, and now I see pickle come up, so I guess the prof was right. So using the pickle reduce method, they could execute arbitrary code after loading the model file into like victim PCs. And the JFrog researchers that found all of this code showed that basically machine learning models still have like largely unexplored potential when it comes to actually exploiting user machines. I also found that if you've ever tried to use any type of AI or machine learning models, you don't really read them over because it kind of goes over my head. So when somebody says, oh, it's gonna do this and help your code do this, I kind of just take them at their word. So maybe that's all a place where we could all get better at reading into and figuring out exactly how they work behind the scenes and make sure there's nothing malicious in there before we use them. Yeah, I just thought that was cool.
So this is going out to all the Android users, and thankfully it's not happening in Canada. It's because I'm an Android user as well, but it's been spreading like wildfire in the UK and in Europe. So Threat Fabric, which is an online fraud prevention company, discovered the threat of a Trojan resurfacing targeting Android users through the Google Play Store, disguised through PDF viewers and phone cleaner apps. The Anata Trojan has been rising in installations. As you can see, these are actually the legitimate applications taken from the Google Play Store. And you can see,
Before games use your
yeah,
data.
so you can see that the PDF reader has over 100,000 unique installations. In total, there's been about 150,000 unique installations between all the different droppers, which are essentially just the Trojan apps. And it's reported that there has been 5 total different droppers, all of which have been taken down from the Google Play Store, but those are only the ones that we know of. So once the Trojan is actually on your device, it pretty much does what a regular Trojan can do. It can steal your usernames, your passwords, your credentials, it can keylog, but the most important thing is that it can take control of the phone, and that's what it's mainly used for. The hacker takes control of the phone and commits bank fraud. But the way they actually do it, the way they get the Trojan on the device is pretty interesting. So if you wanted to download that beautiful PDF reader, it comes normal at first. It comes completely normal. You run into no issues. You can view the PDF. You can edit the PDF. It comes like a normal application. But then, about a week later, Google Play Store enforces an automatic update that automatically installs the Trojan onto your phone, which is how that works. So the hacker, essentially, because of that automatic update, they're allowed to take remote control of the phone, but they can also change the permissions in the accessibility services. And one of the, I didn't believe it at first, but one of the crazy ways that they can, one of the crazy things they can change is they can make the user not have to click any buttons to confirm anything. So when the hacker has access to the phone and they want to download something, they want to configure something, they can make it so the user doesn't get any notifications and they completely just fly under the radar because they don't get any confirmation. So pretty simple to counteract it. Threat Fabric just recommended 2 simple things. Make sure before installing any application that's lesser known to check the permissions it requires. So if a photo editing app requires accessibility services, you know that's a red flag and not to do it. But the most important thing that they harped on throughout their entire report was to disable automatic updates. Obviously, with website or with applications like Chrome or YouTube, that's completely fine. But with lesser known applications, it's better to know what's being installed on your phone rather than not. Again, if a random photo editing app requires a sudden update of accessibility services, then you know something is wrong. So it's just better to have, or to make sure that you know what's being installed on your phone. Thank you.
All right. So this one is less of news and more of like learning that I just found out about. I realized that as AI develops and we're kind of like going into school, a lot of us as AI has really started to become a thing. This is something that we're gonna have to begin dealing with in the near future. And just to have some information about like, you know, what kind of, you know, cyber attacks can be levied against AI are kind of cool. So I learned a little bit about adversarial machine learning. So it's just a term for cyber attacks that manipulate the behavior of AI and AI systems. NIST actually classified 4 types of attacks, and I thought it'd just be cool to go over them. So we have evasion attacks. So these attacks try to change the input of an AI system to make it produce a wrong output. So just like the example on the screen, adding markings to a stop sign to make a driverless car misinterpret the speed limit sign. So this is, an example of a pretty catastrophic failure if that's the case. I don't know if the self-driving cars are using AI models, or they're using machine learning to track where they're going. So this could be a pretty serious thing if people found a way to manipulate it into driverless car systems. There's poisoning attacks. So these attacks would try to corrupt the data used to train the AI system to make it learn wrong behavior. So for example, inserting inappropriate language into conversation records to make a chatbot use its own responses. Privacy attacks. So these attacks try to extract sensitive information from the AI system or the data it was trained on. This one's pretty cool to me. So for example, asking a chatbot many questions to reverse engineer its model or to guess its sources. And abuse attacks, these attacks try to insert false information into a source that the AI system relies on. So this kind of goes in hand with a privacy attack. If you can trick the AI into revealing some of the information about where it's pulling its data from, and then you go to the place where it's pulling its data from, you may actually be able to manipulate the data that it actually presents to users. So this was something that I was I didn't even know you could do that, but apparently you can. So as we start to learn more about AI and as it develops, I foresee that we'll probably be using it for security and have it used against us as security researchers and testers and stuff like that. So it's good to get a jump on it and to read about it. I can link the article. It's a pretty good read, but just wanted to share that with everybody. So thank you so much. And that covers our news. So we'll have a little break. Yeah, no, you did it right.
So I think it is unmuted. I think I'll get started. You guys can listen in if you like, or keep doing what you're doing. That's cool too. My name's Todd Brecher. I'm a manager at KPMG in cyber defense. Been here a couple of times now. Enjoyed my time here. Decided to come back. I understood you guys needed a speaker for this week, so threw together something a little timely. One of our stories this week in the news talked a little bit about the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, and some of the taxonomy they've described in the sort of AI attacks. Something that you may or may not have seen is that NIST has also just recently published version 2.0 of the cybersecurity framework, which is one of the most widely used and widely known, widely adopted cyber frameworks as far as governance goes. So today, we're going to do a little bit of a crash course into the NIST CSF. Fair warning, I am not going to get up here and read every page of the framework to you guys. You guys can do that on your own time. All of our time is more valuable than that. So what we will talk a little bit about today is, first off, what it is, right? So get a baseline understanding. A lot of people have probably heard NIST CSF or seen that acronym before, but maybe don't really understand what it is, what it's made of, or how it's used for that matter. So we're going to talk a little bit about where it's applicable, how it's used. We're going to talk about who can use the NIST CSF. I think, as students, sometimes it might be a little bit intimidating to try and approach the idea of a cyber framework, but there's a lot of applicability for you guys in the same way that there is for us as consultants or, folks in the private sector, public sector. We're also going to talk a little bit about what I think is a really important question that is not often asked, right, is when should you be using the NIST CSF? And then lastly, I kind of want to tie it up by giving you guys some food for thought. Like, why should you actually care about something like the NIST CSF? And this is coming from somebody who, I mentioned my background in cyber defense. I come from pen test. I come from hands-on keyboard. I still think that this is technical knowledge that is worth knowing to be a better, well-rounded practitioner. So why should you care? Why should you understand the applicability of these frameworks? How does it fit for you guys? So let's dive right in. First things first, what it is. National Institute of Standards and Technology. They published the cybersecurity framework in 2014. They've maintained it since. Essentially what this is it is a guide, a framework of risk-based taxonomy of functions, categories, and subcategories. The idea with the NIST CSF is they are trying to break down different cybersecurity sort of objectives into a matrix that you can follow along and align to according to your organization's risk appetite. Historically, the NIST CSF actually came out of a place where there wasn't really a lot of guidance, particularly for what we now call critical infrastructure. Think, you know, your power plants, your water treatment facilities, your basic, energy grid, that kind of stuff. All of this would be kind of considered critical infrastructure. There was a big void there for a long time. So the CSF came out, version 1 and 1.1 were kind of maintained between 2014, 2017, picked up very widespread adoption. Just recently, I believe it was in February, the version 2.0 was made sort of public and published. I think it was available for early preview as early as October last year. Don't quote me on that one. I think, it's maybe a little bit easier to visualize this. So we have this beautiful diagram here. So the NIST cybersecurity framework at the top level is comprised of functions, okay? These are functions of security. What are things that security does for your organization? Security identifies threats, right? So it helps you to understand what risk you face in your environment. This is things like your asset grouping. So understanding what assets you have and where your perimeter really lies and what you're accountable for and where your risk exposure is. It helps you to identify risk in your organization, right? Another function being protection, right? So to protect. These are things that, as far as a control would go, serve the purpose of preventing or protecting your infrastructure from a cyber incident. You have detect. So how are you going to root out compromise, find evil, find weird stuff in your environment, evidence of an existing compromise? You have respond. So this is where you're going to be responding to a threat, something that is materialized and is, causing harm. And you also have recover. So how are you going to get back in the action, right? How are you going to get back to your normal, to your business as usual state? Last and most recently, a major addition, probably the single biggest addition in the version 2.0 publication, is the govern ring. So the governance function, the govern function inside the NIST CSF touches all of the other areas. Now the idea here, the reason I presented them is in this order, this is meant to be a cyclical process, right? You follow this from start to finish in identifying threats and ultimately ending up in recovering them. The governance wheel basically demonstrates the need for every organization to align their risk management, their risk tolerance with each of these functions. So the idea that your overall risk management strategy needs to be involved with each of these other functions. So that's the big inclusion there. And it's very easy to see when it's visual. It does make a lot of sense when you think about that idea of shifting cyber risk to enterprise risk and the strategy that that enables. Now to give you guys a very tangible example, let's start with the function protect, right? So we talked about this. We're using safeguards to protect or reduce cybersecurity risk. That's the logical grouping, the very top order in the framework. Underneath protect, you're going to have a category. So this is like a category of controls or a category of implementations that you might have that serve a purpose in alignment with your function. Data security, PRDS. This is one of the examples in the framework that you'll see. This establishes that objective of data being managed consistent with the organization's risk strategy to protect your CIA, right? As you move lower, you might see, okay, within that goal of protecting your enterprise, and within that goal of looking at data security specifically, you have one level even lower where the NIST CSF is going to prescribe that you're looking specifically at data at rest. This is where the framework stops and where you enter the realm of the practitioner lens. Implementation. How do you do this thing? This is a pretty nebulous objective, right? This is where supplemental materials, things like other NIST special publications, things like practitioner guidance or tools really come into play. At the very top, you start with a very, very high level function, the goal. As you move lower, you start to get more granular into more concrete definition of what needs to be done. When you end up in implementation, so for example, looking at data at rest, one control, a technology control that you might implement would be controlling removable media, right? Does this make sense? So the entirety of the NIST CSF has many, 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 many controls. And like I said, we're not going to spend time going through each one of them, but all of them will follow this kind of progression. And as you move into the realm of the implementation, this is where your experience as a practitioner is really important, because your interpretation or your organization's risk tolerance is going to determine what implementation is effective for you based on how many and which of the NIST CSF guidelines you're looking to follow. To give you a very concrete example of this, in fact, the NIST CSF has what are defined implementation tiers and organizational profiles that are meant to help you kind of line those things up, right? So who do you work for? What's their risk tolerance? How much do they spend on security? You know, what is their goal in implementing the NIST CSF? You can kind of determine how to go about prioritizing your spend and what actions you actually need to be taking by building yourself an organizational profile and going through an implementation process, doing a risk assessment, and prioritizing what's important to you. Now, the implementation tiers are kind of a guideline of, you know, where do you stack up insofar as meeting compliance or aligning to the NIST CSF as a whole. At the very low end, you'll see a partial implementation. This is going to be where people start, right? You have to start somewhere. It means maybe you've picked and chosen what's important to you, and you've implemented some pieces of the NIST CSF, but not a lot. At tier 2, you have risk informed, where now you're doing that, but you're actually doing it with the context of enterprise risk, right? How does this align to your overall organizational risk management strategy? At tier 3, you're taking pieces of the NIST CSF and you have them embedded into repeatable, regular processes, right? This is built into your SDLC. This is built into your hardware decommissioning process according to alignment with the NIST CSF. And at tier 4, you're adaptive, which means your processes, your implementation or alignment to the NIST CSF, it means that you can adaptively respond to new threats, new trends, new capabilities, new requirements, and align to the framework as it's updated, as it's iterated. This is the strongest alignment. Now, organizational profiles are a great guide for, you know, if you're a financial services institution, you want to look and see what other financial services institutions are doing, because ultimately every sector needs to prioritize differently. If you're a power company, you're probably going to have different priorities as far as protecting ICS goes than if you're a retail store, right? So I think this is kind of a good way to frame it. How is it used? Bottom line, should be risk informed, right? The idea is you want to be doing this based on your organizational risk, your organizational needs. But, you know, not everybody needs to aim for tier 4 as far as, you know, the alignment to the NIST CSF goes. That's not the requirement. Who uses it? Well, pretty much everybody. Gonna be honest, everybody can use the NIST CSF, but any Jurassic Park fans? Right? This is a legendary quote. This is an important question, right? I genuinely think not everybody should use the NIST CSF. And that's something I want to spend some time on, right? It is not a silver bullet solution, right? It has pros and it has cons. As a consultant, I really like the NIST CSF because this gives us a pretty neutral framework to work within. It's open to interpretation. It's flexible according to our client needs. It's also flexible in terms of our interpretation, how closely we can align NIST CSF objectives, functions, subcategories, and the like with our recommendations. And it gives us a pretty objective backdrop for our use case. So it's great for us. And it works really well for our client needs too. But the private sector can use this internally. Public sector can use this internally. Pretty much any sector can use this. It's just about how they're going to go about implementing it, right? The thing is, should they is a different question. So for one, if you open it up on your laptops or whatever and you go through, you're going to see there's a lot of controls that they recommend, right? It's a very in-depth review. And some of the things, the objectives that they set, for example, around supply chain risk management or around, you know, that's a recent inclusion, or around implementing data at rest measures, right? The interpretation there. Those solutions, frankly, can get really expensive, right? And the thing is, the NIST CSF doesn't characterize the cost of implementing a solution to any of its problems. When you look at something like having a mechanism to classify and organize your data internally, think about the scale of a bank. Banks are huge. They got a lot of data. And you mean to tell me that you want to be aligned to the NIST CSF and it says all of your data needs to be classified? How are you going to do that? Very carefully. More realistically, I'm going to say you're probably not going to do that, right? But that's the thing. It can be very expensive to actually implement this one-to-one. There are organizations that do it by choice, and they have the means, the technology exists, but is the risk reward worth it? I mean, that's different for every organization, right? The cost ultimately at the end of the day for the risk management piece is a matter of enterprise risk management. It's not cyber risk at that point. Now, another important thing to remember, so the NIST CSF is frankly expansive. It covers a lot of domains, and not all of those domains are applicable to every business, right? If your business doesn't handle payment card information, then maybe you don't need to be as concerned about PCI DSS, for example, as a separate standard. In the same way that if NIST is prescribing technical controls for technology you don't have, you probably don't need to implement that, right? So out of the box, maybe not tailored for your use case. That's part of why they use supplemental materials. That's why they recommend, the organizational profiles and the like. Now another thing, so I mentioned it's very expensive, but not just monetarily, right? In terms of effort. So again, at scale, the NIST CSF, it's a lot of work, right? It's a huge scope. And that means you need a lot of people with a lot of different technical experience and a lot of tools and a lot of capabilities that most organizations frankly do not have. So it's not a question of whether or not everybody can use the CSF. I think almost every organization can benefit from some application of it, whether it's setting an aspirational goal or a target operating model or prioritizing their goals in terms of what security objectives they want to accomplish, what capabilities or programs they want to stand up. Everybody can do that with the CSF. But should they is a separate question. So let's talk about it. When should you use the NIST CSF? I'm going to take the consulting answer here, and I'm going to say there isn't really a single answer. It depends, okay? It's my consultant bit. It depends. But a couple of good ones. So some that stand out. For me, when you're told to, right? If you have a regulator or some kind of third party outside with authority over you, whatever, somebody says you should be using the NIST CSF because it's the best frame of reference, or it's something that we expect of you, you probably should do it. That one's kind of a no-brainer. But I think actually maybe a more nuanced and more interesting area is when you don't really have any structure to compare with. So one area where I think the NIST CSF is particularly important and very widely applicable is when you don't have another frame of reference. You don't have a regulator, or you don't have somebody who's giving you structure with which you can compare your current cyber maturity to, right? In that case, having a very generically applicable framework like the CSF, it makes a lot of sense. It's a good starting point for that kind of assessment or that kind of exercise, right? Another thing that it does, frankly, is it sets a really good example. So you can use it to build a target state, an operating model, and a goal for your organization insofar as what capabilities you want to build out. It gives you a great little shopping list of what do I need to go out and buy, and what do I need to go out and build these capabilities for. And it can really help you to kind of narrow your focus on what comes next. What do I need to think about? The last thing being, again, enterprise risk. So historically, I think one of the big shortcomings of cyber, and one of the reasons why it's been so difficult for cyber to stand up in a lot of organizations and grow into what it needs to be, is that cyber has often been siloed. How many times have people mistaken you as an IT guy, so to speak, right? An IT person? Probably pretty often. And that's the thing. In a lot of businesses, that's the case too. They have this kind of false understanding of the fact that security is IT, or that it's subservient to IT or whatever, when oftentimes it actually should stand on its own. And in reality, when IT, cyber, whatever, when it gets siloed as IT risk or technology risk or something very narrowly defined, it can be difficult to justify as far as funding goes, right? If you've ever done BCP DR planning, you'll know that some of those decisions are made around how much is it going to cost for us to recover versus how much would it cost to actually invest in something to protect us from the incident, and do we have insurance to pay for it, right? I guess maybe relevant for consideration. This is happening in Hamilton right now, right? They've just had a ransomware. All the headlines are talking about, well, we just renewed our insurance. People are wondering, how much did they actually spend? Obviously, there's no information about it right now, but it's maybe a good example of this, of that planning happening in real life. I think it's important to think about, cyber risk really as enterprise risk, and when you need a means of kind of creating that mapping and demonstrating that the risk you're quantifying or you're qualifying insofar as the NIST CSF goes is actually a matter of business continuity or a matter of enterprise risk, that's a good way to do it, because the NIST CSF has the reputation behind it to stand up your argument and really give it some wings, right? Now, maybe when shouldn't you use the CSF? When there's a better tool in your toolkit, right? NIST CSF is just one of many. There's a lot of ways to skin a cat, so to speak. And as far as which framework you choose to use and how you go about accomplishing this kind of security maturity journey, the reality is there might be a better tool for you, right? The CSF, for example, is very qualitative, very high level. It sets lofty goals. They're not very tangible. They're not very practitioner oriented. They don't talk about implementation. By comparison, if you have a regulator knocking on your door and saying, well, you need to do configuration auditing for your network devices. We need to have, an understanding that your network devices are hardened, okay? You might want to be looking at something like the CIS benchmarks, or, you want something more broad, the CIS critical security controls. It's something that is more practitioner focused than NIST. It still serves the same purpose of giving you a framework within which you can grow your security program and build capabilities and find solutions to your problems, but it does it a lot less qualitatively. In fact, it's prescriptive of what settings and configurations you might need as far as the benchmarks go, as an example, right? Similarly, ISO 27K. If you have a client who comes to you and says, I need proof that you guys have a security program, you're not going to hand over your internal documentation. You're not going to hand over whatever. Instead, you're going to look at ISO 27K, because this is a way for you to get certified by an external body and give you a piece of paper that says, we have the practices, the people, the technology, the procedures, right? This is a better tool for your use case. You're not going to go and say, get like a cyber maturity assessment against NIST CSF. You're going to go and get an ISO 27K audit and get certified, right? There are different use cases for different frameworks. A couple others that are worth noting. So FAIR, I think, is worth calling out. It's an older framework. It was released kind of in parallel with the NIST CSF. Wasn't widely adopted because it's much more quantitative in terms of risk, rather than qualitative in the same, or as was kind of NIST's direction. A lot of security folks, frankly, at the time, were not ready to adopt the quantitative method to identifying and characterizing risk in their environments. Even now, it remains like an omnipresent problem, quantifying risk, cyber risk. A lot of people have bad reporting, a lot of people have bad data, they don't realize it, so that's a thing. And then COVID. So we won't spend too much time on COVID, but I guess it's interesting because it's been around for a long time, and it certainly does have alignment with other sort of risk management frameworks that do speak that same enterprise risk sort of language there. So yeah, these are also worth knowing. They might end up being a better choice for you given your use case. Consider the use case, consider the alternatives, pick this like a tool, the same way that you're not going to be using Aircrack NG to, I don't know, do like network info pen test. Like, it's just, that's not what you're doing, right? So now, why should you carry? The first most important thing, frankly, it's an industry standard. People look at this as the gold star, like this is the creme de la creme. Like it's the top choice because it is widely applicable, it is widely reputed, it's maintained by a reputable body, it's available for public comment, it has a lot of great contributors, and there's a lot of great use cases for it, a lot of established history for it. So, I mean, it is an industry standard, that's the reality. Because it's widely used, I think that it's worth highlighting that this is a valuable proficiency for people seeking jobs. If you have experience working with the NIST CSF and you put that on your resume, employers businesses who are actually using the NIST CSF themselves, they're going to look at that and go, ah, this person, they get it, right? They're ready. We don't have to train them on this. They understand how we need to align our technology and our controls and stuff to our governance and to this framework. This is what we use as our benchmark. They get it. This is a valuable, very valuable proficiency, right? Not just NIST CSF too, like working with the other frameworks or at least understanding how to interact with a framework, what value that provides to business. That is the valuable skill, not just the NIST focus. Communication. Last time I was here, I gave a talk on power of soft skills in cyber, okay? I know there's a few friendly faces here who saw that one. Look, I'm gonna be honest. Probably one of the single biggest and most valuable gaps that we can fill as security professionals is interfacing between technical folks and non-technical folks. The people who are making the decisions in large enterprise are often not themselves practitioners. They don't come from the world of hands-on keyboard. They come from elsewhere. And being able to close the gap is a tremendously valuable skill. This gives you a lot of tools to be able to do that. It gives you matrices, it gives you plain language, it gives you very generic and very high level, qualitative, easily digestible business language to frame this stuff, again, not as a matter of cyber risk, but enterprise risk. It gives you a common language to speak. That's really important. That cannot be understated in terms of how valuable that is, right? Another thing, like really, if it wasn't already apparent enough, because this is so broadly applicable, you're probably going to encounter this. It doesn't matter where you work. It doesn't matter who you work for or what role you're in. Every cyber role is going to interact with one of those core functions, right? Those 6 functions broadly characterize just about every role in cyber that you can probably think of in some capacity. That means that having an idea of where you fit in a framework like this, or broadly in the security lifecycle, this is a pretty good way to frame that, right? So with that said, I think this has been a brief, but hopefully effective crash course into what is the NIST CSF, why should you care about it, how does it work a little bit. I'm hoping that you're feeling prepared to go and pull this up on your own and take a look through the framework, because you might be surprised what you see. Play around with the organizational profiles. The new materials are all available for public release. It's completely free. Spend some time and take a look. I think you'll probably find something valuable and hopefully, something that you can develop into a valuable skill on your resume and the like. So that's all I got. I'm here for questions. Go for it.
I got one. I was actually working on my resume today, just like renewed and stuff like that, and started looking at a lot of like job postings just to kind of see what some of the cybersecurity related careers were putting as like requirements and stuff like that on a resume, just kind of building a list. And I noticed that a vast majority of all the roles I was looking at made mention of having some kind of understanding of the NIST framework, which was pretty interesting. I'm trying to figure out or ask, is there like a way that we can get, I don't know, like not necessarily like a certification, but like some way I can put on a resume, like, hey, I've done, X amount of looking into the NIST framework, or I've been certified and like understanding and how to implement it. Is there anything like that, or is it kind of just hands-on?
There are privately delivered accreditations and trainings that are usually at cost, so I would not recommend them for students. Frankly, a lot of them I wouldn't even recommend for professionals because I don't know how valuable they are personally. I can't say that I see a lot of those accreditations in industry. What I will say is when I see that as sort of like a technical skill listed in somebody's resume, it invites an opportunity for me to question them on it. So if I were hiring for a role where it was important for you to understand the NIST CSF, just as an example, or ISO 27K or whatever, if that's in your resume and I see that, I will ask you about it, right? So you being able to characterize what it's made of and how it works, like what we talked about today, that's very good. That's more than probably what most people will be able to do because it shows you've at least read the framework and you know how it works, even if you don't have it memorized. I certainly don't, right? That's the thing. You don't need to know every single ID that's listed in the matrix of categories and subcategories. Frankly, that's not functional. Nobody does that, right? That's like, you don't need to memorize every TTP in the MITRE attack matrix, right? Instead, what you need to know is, how is the MITRE attack matrix built? How do we use it? Why does it function as a periodic table of bad guy behavior, right? In the same way with the NIST CSF, understanding how it's built, how it's applicable, how it's used, it's a good thing to put on your resume as a technical skill. It's also a great thing for you to ask about in your interviews and actually lead them down that path, right? Ask, how are they using the NIST CSF? I saw it in the job posting, and it's something that I've worked with in the past. Maybe I've done some academic projects with it, whatever. You know, how do you guys use it? Is it, you know, an aspirational thing for you? Do you audit yourselves against it? That's a great question to ask.
Thank you.
How would you tailor something that in a resume, like he was talking about? Would that be under a technical skill? Would
Yeah,
it be
totally.
Under, some where would you put that in?
So I would put that in a technical skills section, absolutely, because it is a technical skill. It may not be hands on keyboard, but you know, people who are specialists in the stuff are deeply technical, but they aren't necessarily applied in that same sense. But that doesn't make it any less technical. It's still an area of expertise, or it's still like an area of core proficiency that you may have that many other candidates will not. Any other questions? Go for it.
So is CSF like SOC 2 or like ISO, where it's like a certification, or is it like just a guideline for companies to follow?
So it's a little different with a SOC 2 designation or like an ISO 27K certification. Those are basically, for lack of a better explanation, they're assessments that will be conducted against you, and you need to prove that you're meeting their standards. They'll issue you a certification. With NIST, this is a framework, so you can't get like NIST certified in the same way as you can ISO 27K. ISO 27K it's a standard. This is a framework. So there's a fundamental difference there. Does that make sense?
Could you use that framework to set you up to start then for like the SOC then, so like a building block stepping stone?
Certainly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and that's the idea, you know, with this framework, one of its use cases is exactly that, is building security programs around these objectives. You can do a mapping from NIST to whatever program you're trying to certify into and figure out how do the controls that you've implemented through your NIST programming align to whatever it is that you're trying to certify against. So absolutely. Go for it, follow.
What would be like the 800-53 versus the CSF? What's like the difference between?
Great question. So anybody here familiar with NIST SP 853? Can I pull it up on the laptop? Is it okay? You're in Firefox, so just new tab. So NIST SP 853, Security and Privacy Controls. This is a great example. I thank you for asking this question. This is a really good differentiation. So everybody seen this before for reference?
No, honestly, I've never seen this.
Okay. So SP 853 is also a NIST publication, but this is what's called a special publication. This is very tactical guidance, as in this talks about implementation and controls at the practitioner level. This is not lofty governance objectives, security functions. Instead, this is actually quite low level. So for reference, these special publications are some of those materials that I described as supplementary materials, or informative materials is what NIST calls them. This is much lower level documentation. And if you go through here, right, you're getting way down deep. If you're gonna go into 3.4, for example, or control assessments, this is prescriptive of what should you be doing, not what can you do to align to a larger function, right? You will see, for example, in media protection, they are prescribing that you actually have a program built, that you have all of these features as part of a media protection program, that in doing this, you know, you're designated a person, you know, you've done a whole lot of stuff here. They provide a series, a catalog of controls here as well, right? And with each of these comes heavy, heavy focus on implementation guidance. How should you be doing this thing? Not what should you do, Does that make sense? So special publications, among other informative materials, complement the NIST CSF as the how do you do it rather than the what do you do. Make sense? Clear as mud?
Clear.
Any other questions? I pulled out my phone. I wasn't trying to be rude. I pulled out the stream questions, but
I think we got it.
anything not related to the CSF, like you guys can ask me whatever you want.
How's your day going?
My day's going fine. Having a good time. Good company, you know. No train wreck calls today, which was nice. Yeah, it's pretty good. Had a nice lunch with a colleague and a client. Yeah. Go for it.
Have you ever found while consulting, like, has there ever been a case where you've had to tell a company kind of like back off how much security you're trying to apply? Like, it's too much?
That's an interesting question. Well, I would say yes. There are cases where we've encountered stuff that it doesn't make sense, frankly, right? Where people have been trying to go after a product or after some capability that it doesn't make sense. And I'll give you a very good example. I was engaged to do some technical writing for governance materials, standards, and we had, sort of internal audit-driven findings around the strength of encryption being used for data at rest. Okay. Now that spun off into data in transit, and then eventually data in use, which is kind of the fourth state. Okay. Anybody here ever heard of homomorphic encryption? Okay. We understand how encryption works. That means that in theory, you can't use encrypted data, right? Well, homomorphic encryption is a schema that allows you to do operations on the encrypted data as a feature. So you can work with encrypted data using homomorphic encryption schemas. In practice, very cool. Lots of really amazing academic research going into it. Look up homomorphic encryption, super cool topic area. In application, not possible, especially if your scale is the entirety of a bank. It would be unbelievably expensive to implement some kind of homomorphic encryption capability at scale. And if the internal audit team are bean counters, they're not cyber people, they don't know what homomorphic really means insofar as implementation. They don't always have that best view. And so, yes, there are times where we have to push back and say, what you're proposing would definitely provide absolute security. Is it realistic to implement? No, not even close. In fact, it's completely unreasonable, and we do have to push back on occasion. But I don't think that happens too often. Generally speaking, our clients, they have a pretty good sense of direction, at least what they want. We definitely have clients asking for assessments that may not make sense. So for example, we often have clients ask for things like red teams and stuff, but they're not even ready for pen tests yet, like as far as maturity goes. But that's a different thing, because that's more on the services side of, they come to us and they think that they want something that maybe isn't going to benefit them as much, and we can kind of reroute them in that case. But yeah, that's a good question. Any other kind of open questions? Doesn't have to be about NIST. It could be anything goes.
I guess the opposite side of it, how often do you have a company that thinks you're trying to tell them that they need to implement more than they think they need?
All the time.
Okay, I figured.
That happens much more often,
Yeah.
where whatever we're prescriptive of and whatever we recommend it's often unpalatable, right? Because the reality is, if we're being told, or if we're being engaged to stand up a cyber program, for example, the true costs of relative security are quite high. And when you tell people, you should consider investing in this tool, or if you want to stand up this capability, you need this capability, or what that total investment is going to be, they look at that and they go, how much are we paying you guys? Right? So, yeah, absolutely. That also happens on the other side.
I had a couple times where I've dealt with some stuff with data recovery or some catastrophic failure, and they realized that if they had spent a little bit more money up front, it would have been a lot less problematic once it happened. But it's like as you were saying, I was gonna say, so the people thinking you're wearing the IT hat as IT tech or whatever, it's almost like half the time it's like, what do we pay you for again when everything's working, and then everything goes wrong? It's like, what are we paying you for?
Yeah, yeah.
So it's like they don't want to spend the money, and then all of a sudden they realize maybe we should have. So
Look, I'll tell you, I'll be honest, investing in the security stuff to begin with is a lot cheaper than hiring consultants to tell you do it after the fact, and then doing it anyways.
well, just getting all you have to do is have a failed hard drive and figure out how much it is to ship it off and have them clean the room just to get the data back, to realize that maybe we should pay for a cloud backup solution.
100%. Anything else? Go for it.
I'm sure when you talk to like less technical people, they bring up kind of buzzwords that they've heard or like certain things that they know a little bit about and they think it needs to be implemented. How do you kind of like talk them off that ledge and make them realize it's not quite the option for them? So like AI, for example, everybody wants that now, even if they might not need it and it would be too expensive to implement. How do you tell them, let's back off from that, this might be better?
Great question. The first case is figure out how much do they know, right? You have to know what your common ground is with this person, because that gives you how much you need to explain or how much detail you need to provide. The other thing is, of course, aside from finding common ground, is finding common language. So if you hear them, misappropriating words or saying acronyms wrong and things like that, you might want to correct them subtly, but definitely like use the same language that they're using and make sure you're speaking about it in the same terms as they are. Clarify on that definition. From there, then you can build your argumentation and a position of common ground, something that they will then be able to more readily recognize. I think lastly I talked about like winning friends and influencing people as being an important skill and a great book. That frankly I think is very applicable in these cases, right? Is figure out how much they know, find the common ground with them, pay attention to how they're speaking about this, and then if you disagree, express yourself in common language, in language that is not too technical for that audience, and based on your understanding of what they know, that's kind of how I would go about that situation. Does that make sense? Yeah? Go for it. Speak up, I can't hear you.
I'm more so in the networking developer side.
Sure.
Kind of like breaking up the cybersecurity. What are some things that you recommend for somebody like me who needs to start off? I just know, it's important. China's on our borders. What do we do to protect ourselves? And there's a need for cybersecurity specialists and whatnot. What should I do? Who doesn't know anything about this? Where should I start? What should I start? I just saw this. That's like one thing that was like
Super high level. Yeah.
That's like, where do I, let's dial it back.
Well, the first thing is focus on your soft skills. I'm going to say that every time. People ask me, how do I get a job? I'm going to say, it's your soft skills, it's not your resume, right? The second thing is look at your background. So you come from a networking world and find roles that can use that knowledge in a cyber context, okay? So for example, if you have strong networking foundations, maybe you have some applicability in something like threat hunting, right? If you can look at security architecture and understand where traffic should and shouldn't be going inside of an organization, maybe that informs your methodology as a responder or as somebody who's going to be doing network security monitoring, working as a SOC analyst, that kind of thing. Look at your background, find transferability, and then apply it in a cyber context. To give you a very tangible example, I'm a dropout at University of Guelph. So I actually studied environmental and human health toxicology for 2.5 years. So I transplanted into cyber. Granted, I went back to school for it. I went to Seneca, got my degree, whatever. But what I actually found was moving into cyber, taking my background from environmental and human health risk assessment work, the risk assessment piece is the same set of skills working from talks as it is in cyber. So I found a niche where my communication skills, my ability to do qualitative and quantitative risk assessment, to do technical writing, to communicate on those risks was applicable in cyber. I do the same job that I was doing then as I do now. The only difference is the vocabulary that I use, right? So those are my 2 steps for you. Focus on your soft skills and find a way to apply your transferable background, whatever it is, whether it's networking, whether it's pen test, whether, any of that developer interest, for example, and look at roles in cyber that can use that in a cyber context. Make sense? Go for it.
So I know cybersecurity is a big umbrella term. It's like super technical and like there's. I come from a GRC and IAM
Yep.
roles. So I'm just asking like in terms of certifications, you know, there's CEH, which is like super technical.
Yeah.
But for like GRC or like IAM, what sort of certifications do you guys look for?
Well, I think right now, one area, particularly for IAM, a lot of it is product centric, right? So you'll see like SailPoint or CyberArk designations. Those are like trainings provided by the vendor. I think those are very valuable. They put you into a niche, unfortunately, where you become sort of recognized as a product specialist. It's a good and a bad thing. It's good because it demonstrates a proficiency with popular tooling, stuff that is widely used, and especially if you're, you know, aligning with the right products. What that demonstrates to a prospective employer is that you're going to be brought in, you're not going to need to be trained on the tool, you're going to be basically ready to fly day one, right? Already going to have your feathers. Now, it's not as good because if you do have that designation and you are recognized only for that thing, that's the only thing in your background, people are going to look at that and go, this is a very one-dimensional candidate. They can only do SailPoint. They can only do CyberArk, right? So I think it's worth training. It's worth getting the product-centric stuff insofar as the IAM space goes. GRC is a little bit different. GRC is a much broader role to play. So what kind of GRC you're doing, sort of the topic area that you're working in, if you're working with cloud technologies or if you're working with infrastructure or, you know, the like, there are GRC roles interspersed within all of those technical realms. Having sort of practitioner designations in those areas. So for example, if you're doing GRC for cloud, maybe having a CCSP is relevant for you, right? That shows that you have a high level understanding of the practitioner view of that field. And that's complementary for GRC. And something else I should clarify, I know you mentioned like it's a less technical side. I disagree. I think that GRC, IAM, all of that, it's deeply technical, it's specialized, but it isn't hands-on keyboard in the same way that many of us would think about things like penetration testing and the like. That's where people, I think, immediately go to like technical, but don't undersell that stuff. It is deeply technical, it's specialized, it is a dedicated function. It's just maybe not in the same way as we would see some other kind of common skills in our field. Anything else?
I guess an expansion to that. Since you work in consulting, what would you say is like a path that somebody could take if they wanted to get into that industry?
In consulting?
Yeah.
So I think the easiest way into consulting is if you know someone. So first and foremost, network. You guys are laughing, I'm serious. Like, look, consulting is an industry built on relationships. It's who you know. That's how we get work. That's how we hire people. That's how you grow your personal brand. That's how you become known, how you become recognized as a specialist. That's part of why I'm here, because I get to meet all of you. Who knows where you guys are going to be in 10 years' time? You guys could end up being clients, maybe employers, right? So genuinely, the best way in, probably first, is look at who you know, right? Leverage your network. If you have a friend or if you have a mentor, somebody working in consulting, that's probably your avenue in. I'll tell you straight up, that's how I got in. I had an alumni, a mentor of mine from my school program. I reached out to him cold on Discord. I was like, hey, Iggy, I heard you work at Deloitte. You got any jobs? I'm serious. And he goes, no, I work at KPMG, but yes, we do have jobs. And so I sent him my resume, and that was how it started. I interviewed with somebody who ghosted me, and then I interviewed with my boss in the back there, and then that's how it happened. So, yeah. Go for it.
Does experience in consulting in like other fields transfer in any capacity to like information security or cybersecurity consulting?
Yes.
Because like I have 3 years of consulting in the automotive industry, where I was like going in with the software that my company creates to like optimize their sales, performance, how they could use it better, how they weren't using the software, increasing sales targets, saving money. Like I did that for like 3 years straight, and consulting is one of the options that I'm thinking about for cybersecurity. But would that be a benefit
So I will tell you, most jobs that you will have had, whether you're working in a kitchen or whether you're doing consulting and software sales, whether you're doing enterprise tech sales, whether you're doing retail, it doesn't matter. There is something applicable in it. I think experience consulting in another industry is absolutely relevant, right? I'm a testament to that. I think it's more about what story you tell. If you want to, for example, highlight something very valued in consulting, having a customer-centric worldview, right? You are obsessed with your customers. You care about the quality of service they receive. That's true whether you're working in a restaurant, whether you're doing sales in a Best Buy, or whether you're selling to a B2B, right? You care about that. That's like a value you build, or that's like a skill set that you develop. It doesn't matter where it happens. Instead, it's about what story you tell of how it happened and how you can convince somebody that it is relevant if they're trying to hire you. Make sense?
Yep.
So yes, totally relevant, very applicable. I saw a hand up.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say it was a funny story. I actually interviewed for KPMG for the strategy governance.
Okay.
And I made it for the I interviewed with Adele Paselcha.
Okay.
And the reason that the way I got into it was I applied before but I got rejected, so I actually cold messaged like some KPMG consultants and LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I finally got one, so that's how I moved up to the final interview process.
So I will tell you, right? We have our public-facing career portal, and then we have our personal networks. Okay, which do you think that we value resumes from more? Right? And it's not to say that those public channels aren't real, right? So for example, our co-op postings, I can tell you very candidly, we get almost 800 applicants for some of those positions, right? Those get filtered down before they ever make it to a practitioner like me by our HR folks, because we can't do 800 resumes. We don't have time for that. We're busy people, right? By comparison, when I get a resume that one of my consultants hands me and says, hey, I know a guy, I know a person, they're the one that I think we should hire, right? They fit our need. That's something much more serious than what I get out of my careers portal for my HR people. At least for me, right? Because I value the trust that I have in that person's recommendation. When that comes to me through a channel that I trust, it means a lot more. And when you reach out to a KPMG consultant, as an example, and you say, hey, can I have a coffee chat? I want to spend 30 minutes. I want to pick your brain. I want to ask you some questions about what it's like to work at the firm, right? You build that personal connection. If you impress somebody, they're going to pass your resume on, right? The same way that you probably would if you were in that position, because, oh, you're an awesome candidate. Hold on, there's something in this for me too, right? So, absolutely. That is, I think, a pretty common story. I'm not saying go around our official channels. I am saying, though, I think that, personally, I value those referrals a lot more than I do what I get out of our sort of hiring machine. Put it that way.
I just want to also add my own personal experience. I never would have joined KPMG and my ISSessions Todd team if I was never a part of ISSessions, and especially on the executive team. One of the other things that you should look at is what communities are open, especially in the Toronto area, such as OWASP Toronto, DEFCON 416,
Yep.
TASK. There are so many influential people who are also in consulting roles. So I know people from CGI and EY who are in charge of a lot of these initiatives that are also looking to hire people as well. So you want to, and especially with what Todd said earlier, especially with like the book, how to meet people and influence people.
Win friends and influence people.
Yeah. So it's a perfect opportunity to test out some of the skills. You get to learn from that. You get to know other people. And then on top of that, as you, like Todd said, with coffee chats, like literally have coffee chats with some of these people. It brings you so much more. You get to hear about different experiences, different openings in the field. There's such a huge community and it's so intertwined. You'd be surprised by how many people you can learn about and know in such a short amount of time by just attending these events and getting yourself to be known.
And to your point, you got to interview with Adil. He's a big boss, right? He's an important person in our firm. And whether you know it or not, right, he's somebody who is ultimately like a hiring decision maker. And that's not very often that like somebody would go through like an outside channel and get passed all the way up the chain. It shows that people do care. When you impress somebody and they think you're good enough to go and talk to that big boss, right? That's a good thing. And that's almost always, at least in my experience, how you're going to get into the best teams and sort of the most important roles. It's people recognizing you for who you are and what you can do, what value you can bring to a team, rather than what's on your resume and where you went to school or what your GPA was or any of that really arbitrary stuff, right? So don't ignore our official channels. You should apply there. But
Don't discourage using both channels at the same time.
you absolutely should be. Leverage your network. Like, seriously, if that's more important than anything I talked about with NIST CSF today. Leverage your network if you want to do consulting. Yeah. Anything else? We good? All right. Thanks for having me, folks.